Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you love captivating stories about men transforming into women in unique and fascinating ways, then be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Now, let's jump right into today's tale.
Jackson Reid had always been known for two things: his encyclopedic knowledge of ancient artifacts and his spectacular bad luck with women. At 34, he was the youngest curator the Metropolitan Museum had ever appointed, and quite possibly the loneliest. Not that he minded much. Artifacts didn't argue, didn't leave, didn't expect him to remember anniversaries. "Another exciting Friday night, eh, Reid?" he muttered to himself, carefully unpacking the new collection that had arrived that afternoon. The Vandermeer estate had finally released their legendary private collection of Mesopotamian artifacts, and Jackson had the enviable task of cataloging them before the exhibit opened next month. The collection was remarkable: ceremonial daggers, clay tablets, jewelry from the Akkadian period. But it was the small, unassuming statue that caught his attention. No larger than his hand, it depicted a feminine figure with exaggerated curves, similar to the Venus figurines found throughout Europe, but with distinctly Near Eastern features. "You're not on the inventory," Jackson murmured, turning the statuette over in his hands. The material was unusual, not quite stone, not quite ceramic, with a warm, almost flesh-like quality that defied immediate classification. Around the base, barely visible in the low light of the conservation room, were inscriptions in what appeared to be ancient Sumerian. Jackson's knowledge of the language was rudimentary at best, but he recognized enough to make out something about transformation and essence. "Well, aren't you a mystery?" He placed the figurine under the examination light and reached for his magnifying glass. As his fingers brushed against the statuette's smooth surface, a strange warmth pulsed through the material. Jackson jerked back, startled, but not before noticing the faintest glow emanating from the inscriptions. That's unusual. Curiosity overriding caution, he touched the statuette again, more deliberately this time. The warmth intensified, spreading from his fingertips up his arm like an electric current. The inscription began to glow more brightly, the ancient symbols seeming to shift and move before his eyes. Jackson found he could suddenly read them with perfect clarity, as though the knowledge had been downloaded directly into his brain. "To know the divine feminine, one must become the vessel," he translated aloud, entranced. "For one cycle of the moon, the essence shall transform the unworthy man to understand what he has failed to value." As the last word left his lips, the statuette flared with blinding light. Pain shot through Jackson's body, not sharp or burning, but deep and pulling, as though his very cells were being stretched and remolded. His voice died in his throat, suddenly constricted. Jackson collapsed to the floor, the statuette still clutched in his hand. He couldn't release it, couldn't call for help as waves of sensation pulsed through him. His skin felt hypersensitive, every nerve ending firing at once. His bones ached with a deep, penetrating pressure. Muscles contracted and released in patterns he couldn't control. Through it all, the statuette continued to pulse with warm light, growing hotter in his grasp. The transformation began subtly at first, his fingers narrowing, becoming more slender and elegant. The change crept up his arms, softening the angular muscles, smoothing the coarse hair. Jackson watched in horrified fascination as his forearms slimmed, wrists narrowing to delicate proportions. "This isn't possible," he gasped, his voice higher, breathier. The sound startled him almost as much as the sight of his changing limbs. The sensation intensified, spreading across his chest. His pectoral muscles seemed to liquefy, then reform into softer, fuller curves that strained against his button-down shirt. The pressure was uncomfortable, almost painful, yet accompanied by a tingling sensitivity that made him gasp. His waist cinched inward, the feeling like an invisible corset being gradually tightened. Simultaneously, his hips flared outward, bones shifting with dull pops that sent sparks of pain radiating through his lower body. Jackson tried to stand, to reach for his phone, but his center of gravity had shifted dramatically. He stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the examination table. His reflection in the polished steel surface showed a face in mid-transformation, jaw narrowing, cheekbones becoming more pronounced, lips fuller. His short brown hair was lengthening before his eyes, darkening to a rich auburn that fell past his shoulders in waves. "Stop," he pleaded with the statuette, still clutched in his hand. "Whatever you are, whatever this is, stop." But the transformation continued relentlessly. His clothes felt wrong, too tight in some places, too loose in others. His trousers hung loosely around his narrowed waist but strained across newly flared hips. His shoes were suddenly too large, his feet having shrunk and narrowed. Most disorienting was the internal shifting, a pulling and reorganizing deep within his core that made him curl into a fetal position on the cool tile floor. The sensation wasn't precisely painful, but profoundly unsettling, like puzzle pieces of his anatomy being rearranged into a new configuration. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, the glowing subsided and the statuette cooled in her grasp. Jackson lay panting on the floor, afraid to move, afraid to confront what had happened. Finally, necessity forced action. He needed to see, to confirm what every sensation in his new body was already telling him. With trembling arms, Jackson pushed himself up, immediately aware of the unfamiliar weight on his chest, the strange absence between his legs, the new curves and hollows that defined his form. The conservation room had a full-length mirror used for photographing larger artifacts. Jackson staggered toward it, each step an education in new balance, new movement. The reflection that greeted him confirmed his most incredible fear. Where Jackson Reid had stood was now a woman, slender yet curvy, with long auburn hair and wide hazel eyes that still held his shocked expression. His clothes hung awkwardly on this new form, his shirt straining across an impressive chest, trousers barely clinging to a narrowed waist. "This is impossible," he whispered, the voice that emerged delicate and melodic. "Absolutely impossible." He raised a trembling hand to his face, watching as the reflection did the same. The hand that touched his cheek was smaller, the fingers longer and more tapered, nails naturally oval where his had been bluntly squared. "Okay, don't panic," he told his reflection, the feminine voice still shocking to his ears. "There has to be an explanation, some kind of hallucination or dream." But even as he said it, Jackson knew this was no hallucination. The sensations were too vivid, too consistent. He looked down at the statuette, still clutched in his hand, the inscription no longer glowing but clearly visible. "For one cycle of the moon, the essence shall transform." "One cycle of the moon," he repeated. "A month, I'm stuck like this for a month." The implications began crashing down like dominoes. His job, his apartment, his life. How could he explain suddenly becoming female? Who would believe him? As if in answer to his rising panic, his phone rang, the sound jarring in the quiet conservation room. Jackson fumbled for it, nearly dropping it with unfamiliar fingers. The caller ID read Sophia Martinez, his assistant curator, who was supposed to be joining him to catalog the collection. Jackson stared at the phone, heart racing. Should he answer? What would he say? How could he possibly explain? Before he could decide, the door to the conservation room swung open, and Sophia walked in, phone still at her ear. "Jackson, are you in here? I've been calling." She stopped short, staring at the strange woman standing amid the artifacts. "I'm sorry, I was looking for Dr. Reid. Who are you?" Jackson opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Sophia, it's me, I'm Jackson." Sophia's eyes widened, first in confusion, then in alarm. Her hand moved toward the security button near the door. "How did you get in here? This area is restricted." "No, wait, I can explain." Jackson raised his hands placatingly, then realized how ridiculous any explanation would sound. "Well, I can't actually explain, but I can prove it's me." Sophia's finger hovered over the button. "You have 30 seconds. You have a birthmark shaped like Australia on your left shoulder. You're allergic to kiwi fruit but eat it anyway because you're stubborn. Last Christmas party, you told me your secret dream is to quit museums and open a taco truck. You call your cat Professor Whiskers, but his real name is Fluffy, which you think is embarrassingly uncreative." Sophia's hand slowly lowered, her expression shifting from alarm to bewilderment. "Jackson, but how? What? You're a woman." "I noticed," Jackson replied dryly, gesturing to his new body. "It's this." He held up the statuette. "Some kind of ancient Sumerian curse or spell or, I don't know, I touched it, read the inscription, and this happened. Sophia approached cautiously, professional curiosity gradually overcoming her shock. That's not possible. Evidently it is, Jackson gestured to his transformed body. Because here I am. Sophia circled him, examining the transformation with an archaeologist's analytical eye. This is incredible. You're completely female, not just superficially, but the bone structure, the proportions. She reached out as if to touch his face, then caught herself. Sorry, that was unprofessional. Under the circumstances, I think we're beyond professional niceties, Jackson sighed, running a hand through his now long hair. Sophia, what am I going to do? I can't exactly walk into work on Monday like this. No, she agreed, still staring. You can't. Her gaze shifted to the statuette. What exactly did the inscription say? For one cycle of the moon, the essence shall transform the unworthy man to understand what he has failed to value, Jackson quoted. A month, Sophia. I'm stuck like this for a month. A month, she repeated, a hint of amusement creeping into her voice. Well, that's actually kind of fascinating from a research perspective. Fascinating? I'm having an identity crisis here. Sorry, she said, not looking particularly sorry. But you have to admit, this is unprecedented. A genuine magical artifact. This rewrites everything we know about ancient Mesopotamian culture. Jackson glared at her, which felt different on his new face. I'm so glad my catastrophe is academically stimulating for you. Right, sorry, Sophia said, focusing. Practical matters first. You can't go home like that. Your doorman would never let you in. You can stay at my place tonight while we figure this out. And then what? Jackson asked, gesturing helplessly at his transformed body. Then we do what archaeologists do best, Sophia replied with unexpected enthusiasm. Research. If this artifact caused the transformation, there must be a way to reverse it, or at least understand it better. Jackson looked down at his new form, then back at the statuette that had caused this impossible change. Research. Right, because there are so many peer-reviewed papers on magical gender transformation. Actually, Sophia said thoughtfully, if we look at cross-cultural mythological patterns, there are numerous instances of gender transformation as divine punishment or enlightenment. Greek myths, Norse legends, Hindu texts. Not helping, Jackson muttered. Sorry, let's focus on getting you out of here first. Sophia glanced at his ill-fitting clothes. We need to find you something to wear. The costume department for the museum's educational program was their salvation. Though closed for the weekend, Sophia had keys, and soon they were rifling through racks of historical reproductions and modern basics kept for the staff. Try these, Sophia handed him a pair of jeans, a simple blouse, and most embarrassingly, underwear still in packaging. They're kept for the overnight education programs when kids sometimes need changes of clothes. Jackson took the items reluctantly. Turn around. Really? I've seen you in a bathing suit at the company picnic. That was different and you know it, Jackson replied, feeling his cheeks heat up. Another new sensation, he'd never blushed easily before. Sophia rolled her eyes but turned around. Fine, though I think we're past modesty at this point. Changing clothes was yet another lesson in his new anatomy. Everything fit differently, moved differently. The simplest task of putting on a shirt now involved navigating around breasts, his breasts, a concept so surreal he could barely process it. The sensation of the new clothes against his transformed skin was startlingly intense. Fabric that would have felt ordinary before now seemed to heighten his awareness of every curve and hollow of his new form. The bra was particularly confounding, restrictive yet necessary, uncomfortable yet relieving. Are you decent yet? Sophia called, still facing away. I think so, Jackson replied, tugging the blouse into place. Though decent seems like a stretch for this entire situation. Sophia turned and assessed him critically. Not bad. We'll need to get you proper clothes tomorrow, but this will do for now. Jackson looked down at himself, still not reconciled to the curves and contours that had replaced his familiar form. This is insane. I'm hallucinating, or in a coma, or having a genuine encounter with the supernatural, Sophia finished, which, as scientists, we should approach methodically. She held out her hand. Let me see the statuette. Jackson handed it over reluctantly. Be careful. It seems stable now, she observed, examining the now dormant artifact. No more glowing or warmth. Fascinating craftsmanship, definitely Akkadian influence, but some unusual elements. Can we admire it academically after we figure out how to reverse this? Jackson interrupted. Right, let's get you to my place, and then we'll start researching. Getting out of the museum proved simpler than expected. At the late hour, only security guards remained, and they barely glanced at Sophia and her friend, signing out. Jackson's museum ID remained in his wallet, but his appearance no longer matched the photo, making it useless. In Sophia's car, reality began to fully sink in. Jackson stared out the window at the familiar city streets, now seen through unfamiliar eyes. His very perception seemed altered, colors slightly more vivid, details more noticeable. So, Sophia broke the silence as they drove. How does it feel? How does what feel? Jackson asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. Being transformed, physically I mean, is it painful, disorienting? Jackson considered the question. It was painful during the actual change. Now it's just strange, like wearing someone else's body. Everything feels different, weight, balance, sensations. Even my senses seem altered. Fascinating, Sophia murmured. The neurological implications alone. Can you stop treating me like a research subject for 5 minutes? Jackson snapped, then immediately felt guilty at Sophia's hurt expression. Sorry, I'm just overwhelmed. Of course you are, she said softly. This is unprecedented, impossible really, yet here we are. Here we are, Jackson echoed, looking down at his transformed body. The question is, where do we go from here? Sophia's apartment was a cluttered one-bedroom in the East Village, filled with books, artifacts, and the eclectic collection of a well-traveled archaeologist. Professor Whiskers greeted them with suspicious yellow eyes, paying special attention to Jackson. He knows something's different about you, Sophia observed as the cat circled Jackson's legs, sniffing curiously. At least someone recognizes me, Jackson muttered. You should try to get some sleep, Sophia said, preparing the pull-out couch. Everything seems more manageable in the morning. But sleep proved elusive. Jackson lay awake, acutely aware of every unfamiliar sensation in his transformed body. The weight distribution on the mattress felt wrong. His hair kept getting in his face. His skin seemed hypersensitive to the sheets. And most disconcertingly, the emptiness between his legs and the new weight on his chest served as constant reminders of his altered state. When he did finally drift off, his dreams were vivid and disorienting, fragments of his male life interspersed with unfamiliar sensations and perspectives. He woke several times, each awakening bringing the same shock of realization that no, this wasn't a dream, and yes, he was still female. Morning brought no reprieve. If anything, the bright sunlight streaming through Sophia's windows only highlighted the reality of his transformation. Jackson sat up, pushing long auburn hair from his face, and caught his reflection in Sophia's decorative mirror across the room. The woman staring back was undeniably attractive. High cheekbones, full lips, large hazel eyes framed by long lashes. In another circumstance, she was exactly the type of woman Jackson would have been too intimidated to approach at a bar. This is so weird, he muttered, his feminine voice still startling to his ears. Good morning, Sophia called, emerging from her bedroom. How are you feeling? Like I'm still trapped in a bizarre dream, Jackson replied, running a hand through his tangled hair. Please tell me you have coffee. Coming right up, and then we need to get you some proper clothes. You can't wear museum educational program leftovers for a month. A month, the timeline hit Jackson anew. Sophia, what about my job, the exhibition, my life? Sophia paused in measuring coffee grounds. I've been thinking about that. We need a cover story, a temporary replacement. Who? It's not like I have a convenient twin sister to step in. No, Sophia said slowly, but you do have a newly discovered cousin who happens to be an expert in Mesopotamian artifacts. Jackson stared at her. You can't be serious. Why not? It's only for a month. You said yourself the inscription specified 1 cycle of the moon. You can be Jacqueline Reid, visiting scholar from, she thought for a moment, University of Chicago. This is insane. More insane than being transformed by an ancient statuette? Sophia raised an eyebrow. Look, you're still you, same knowledge, same expertise, just in a different package. The Vandermeer collection needs to be cataloged, and you're still the best person for the job. And what about my apartment, my life outside work? We'll figure it out step by step, Sophia assured him, starting with getting you properly dressed, after coffee. The coffee helped, though Jackson discovered another difference. His tolerance seemed reduced, the caffeine hitting harder and faster than he was used to. Is this what being female is always like? He wondered aloud as they headed out to shop for necessities. Everything just feels more. That's a vast overgeneralization, Sophia replied, but there are certainly physiological differences in how bodies process stimuli. Hormones affect everything from pain perception to emotional responses. Great, Jackson muttered. So I'm not just dealing with a new body, but a whole new biochemistry. Look on the bright side, Sophia said as they entered a department store. This is literally unprecedented research into human experience. Think of it as the ultimate anthropological field study. I didn't sign up for this field study, Jackson reminded her, but he had to admit her framing helped a little. Approaching this scientifically gave him some sense of control in an uncontrollable situation. Shopping proved to be yet another revelation. The overwhelming variety of women's clothing, the different sizing systems that seemed deliberately obtuse, the sheer amount of decisions required for a basic wardrobe, it was exhausting. How do you do this all the time? Jackson asked as Sophia helped him navigate the complexities of bra sizing. Practice, she replied simply, and necessity. By afternoon, equipped with enough basics to get through a week, they returned to Sophia's apartment to strategize. The statuette sat on her coffee table, innocent-looking despite its power. Okay, Sophia said, pulling out a notebook. We need to create Jacqueline Reid's background, enough detail to be convincing but vague enough that no one can easily fact-check. Jackson watched her efficient planning with a mixture of gratitude and resignation. This might actually work, until someone who knows me well meets Jacqueline and realizes the resemblance is uncanny. We'll say you're cousins, family resemblance explained. Sophia tapped her pen thoughtfully. The bigger challenge will be you acting convincingly female in professional situations. You may know artifacts, but you don't know how to navigate the world as a woman. Jackson frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I just act like myself. Sophia gave him a look that suggested he was being naive. It's not that simple. Social dynamics are different. Expectations are different. How people respond to you will be different. That's stereotyping, Jackson protested. It's reality, Sophia countered, and you'll need to understand it to pull this off, starting with how you move, how you speak, even how you sit right now. Jackson glanced down, suddenly aware he was sitting with legs spread wide, a comfortable position for his male body but incongruous with his current form. He shifted awkwardly, crossing his legs. This is going to be harder than I thought, he admitted. One day at a time, Sophia reassured him. Tomorrow, we'll introduce Jacqueline Reid to the museum director and take it from there. As evening fell, Jackson stood at Sophia's window, looking out at the city. The same New York he'd always known, now viewed through literally different eyes. His reflection in the glass showed a stranger who was somehow also himself, a contradiction he was only beginning to understand. One cycle of the moon, he murmured, touching the window glass. What exactly am I supposed to learn in that time? Behind him, the statuette sat silently on the coffee table, its ancient wisdom offering no immediate answers. Monday morning arrived with brutal swiftness. Jackson stood before Sophia's full-length mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back. Jacqueline Reid wore a modest but well-fitted navy pencil skirt, cream blouse, and low heels that had required an hour of practice to walk in properly. I look like I'm playing dress-up, Jackson muttered, tugging at the unfamiliar clothes. You look professional and perfectly appropriate, Sophia countered, making final adjustments to his hair, which she'd styled into a sleek, low bun. Remember, chin up, shoulders back, smaller steps than you're used to. Jackson attempted the posture, feeling ridiculous. This is never going to work. Director Hargrove has known me for 6 years. Which is why we're leading with the family connection. You're Jackson's cousin, called in as a temporary replacement while he's on emergency leave for a private family matter. Sophia stepped back to assess her handiwork. Besides, Hargrove barely looks up from his budget spreadsheets during meetings. As long as you know your artifacts, he won't look too closely. That's actually true, Jackson admitted. Hargrove was notoriously disinterested in his curators' personal lives. The museum's imposing entrance had never felt so intimidating. Jackson's new heels clicked against the marble floor, each step an exercise in unfamiliar balance. Security guards, who normally greeted Dr. Reid with casual nods, now tracked his progress with curious eyes. "Stop fidgeting," Sophia whispered as they rode the elevator to the administrative floor. "You look like you're about to confess to a crime." "I feel like I'm committing one," Jackson hissed back. "Identity fraud for starters." "Technically, you're still you, just temporarily repackaged." Director Hargrove's secretary waved them directly into his office. The director himself, a balding man in his 60s with perpetually ink-stained fingers, barely glanced up from his computer. "Ah, Ms. Martinez, this must be Dr. Reid's cousin you called about." "Yes, Director Hargrove. May I present Dr. Jacqueline Reid from the University of Chicago. She's kindly agreed to step in while Jackson deals with his family emergency." Hargrove finally looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Jackson's face. Remarkable family resemblance. Jackson extended his hand, trying to remember everything Sophia had coached him on. Firm handshake, but not too firm. Maintain eye contact, but don't stare. Smile, but not too broadly. "Thank you for accommodating this unusual situation, Director. My cousin speaks very highly of the museum's collection." Hargrove's handshake was brief but respectful, noticeably gentler than the bone-crushing grip he usually offered male colleagues. "Yes, well, the Vandermeer exhibition is too important to delay. Do you have experience with Mesopotamian artifacts, Dr. Reid?" Jackson relaxed slightly, on familiar ground at last. "My doctoral thesis was on ritual objects of the Akkadian period, with particular focus on symbolic representations of divinity in everyday items." Hargrove nodded, already losing interest. "Excellent. I'll leave you in Ms. Martinez's capable hands then. The board expects a progress report on the exhibition next Monday." And just like that, Jacqueline Reid was officially part of the museum staff. "That was almost too easy," Jackson whispered as they left Hargrove's office. "Told you," Sophia replied. "Now for the real test, the conservation room staff." The small team of preservationists and assistant curators who worked directly with Jackson were harder to convince. They studied Jacqueline with open curiosity, noting the similarities to their absent boss. "Jackson never mentioned a cousin in the same field," remarked Eli, the senior preservationist, with undisguised suspicion. "We weren't particularly close growing up," Jackson improvised. "Academic rivalry, you could say, but family is family." "Well, you certainly inherited the same eye for detail," Eli conceded after watching Jackson expertly handle a delicate clay tablet. "The family resemblance is remarkable." If only they knew how remarkable, Jackson thought. By mid-morning, he had settled into a rhythm of work, the familiar process of cataloging and preservation providing welcome distraction from his unfamiliar body. It wasn't until the team broke for lunch that the full social implications of his transformation became apparent. "Join us, Dr. Reid," invited Teresa, one of the junior curators. "We usually grab sandwiches at the cafe across the street." The casual lunch outing, something Jackson had participated in countless times, was transformed by his new perspective. The group dynamic shifted subtly around him, conversations flowing differently. Men who normally debated with Jackson now deferred slightly, waiting for Jacqueline to finish speaking. Women included him in knowing glances and subtle eye rolls at certain comments. Most disconcerting was the attention from Dr. Nicholas Webb, the handsome head of the Egyptian department, who had never given Jackson more than a professional nod in the hallway. Now, he seemed to materialize beside Jacqueline at every opportunity. "Chicago has an excellent Mesopotamian collection," Webb remarked, leaning slightly closer than was strictly necessary. "I lectured there last spring. I'm surprised we didn't cross paths. I was probably buried in research, Jackson deflected, uncomfortably aware of Webb's cologne and the way his eyes lingered. Was this how female colleagues felt all the time? Perhaps I could show you some of our latest Egyptian acquisitions, Webb suggested. There are fascinating parallels with your Akkadian pieces. Before Jackson could respond, Sophia intervened smoothly. I'm afraid Dr. Reid's schedule is completely full with the Vandermeer exhibition, Nicholas, perhaps another time. Webb's smile tightened slightly. Of course, the invitation stands, Dr. Reid. As he walked away, Jackson exhaled slowly. Has he always been like that? Like what? Sophia asked innocently. So attentive. Oh, Webb, he's actually being relatively subtle by his standards. Sophia gave him a pointed look. Welcome to the other side of professional dynamics, Jacqueline. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of cataloging, interspersed with awkward social navigation. By closing time, Jackson was exhausted in a way that transcended physical fatigue. How do you do this every day? He asked Sophia as they left the museum. It's like managing two jobs simultaneously, the actual work and then all this, social calculation. You get used to it, Sophia replied. Though it's fascinating watching you experience it for the first time, most women don't have the perspective of comparison. Back at Sophia's apartment, Jackson kicked off the torturous heels with a groan of relief. These should be classified as instruments of torture. No argument there, but they do make your legs look great. Jackson shot her a look, which Sophia returned with innocent amusement. Just an observation. The next few days established a routine. Jacqueline settled into her role at the museum, Jackson's expertise shining through despite his altered form. The statuette remained safely stored in Sophia's apartment while they researched its origins in their free time. By Thursday, Jackson had almost adjusted to the daily mechanics of his female body, almost. Certain sensations remained disconcertingly intense. The brush of silk against skin, the weight and movement of breasts with each step, the way certain fabrics created friction in newly sensitive areas. Is it always this? Distracting? He asked Sophia after nearly dropping a priceless ceramic piece when the air conditioning kicked on, sending an unexpected chill across his skin. Is what distracting? Sophia asked, not looking up from her catalog. Everything, physical sensations. It's like someone turned up all my nerve endings to maximum sensitivity. Sophia glanced up, amused. Welcome to life with estrogen as your dominant hormone. Yes, skin sensitivity is typically higher. You get used to it mostly. That evening, researching in Sophia's living room, they finally discovered something promising about the statuette. An obscure academic paper referenced similar figurines found in the temple of Inanna, Mesopotamian goddess of love, beauty, and transformation. Listen to this, Sophia read excitedly. These figurines were reportedly used in rituals to impart wisdom through embodied experience. Priestesses claimed they could change one's physical form to better understand divine feminine principles. Divine feminine principles, Jackson repeated skeptically, shifting uncomfortably on the couch. Even after days in this body, he couldn't seem to find a sitting position that felt natural. What does that even mean? It means your transformation isn't random. It's purposeful, designed to teach something. Great, a mandatory course in Femininity 101 that I never signed up for. Jackson ran fingers through his now long hair, still startled by its silky texture. What could I possibly need to learn that requires this extreme a method? Sophia shrugged. Maybe that's what you're supposed to figure out. The weekend brought a new challenge, navigating the world outside the controlled environment of the museum. Sophia insisted they couldn't stay cooped up in her apartment, and reluctantly, Jackson agreed to a day in the city. The experience was eye-opening. Walking through familiar neighborhoods felt entirely different in his female form. The constant awareness of being observed, the calculations about which streets to avoid, the subtle shifts in posture and pace in response to who was nearby. Do you always think this much about just existing in public? Jackson asked as they paused at a cafe. Pretty much, Sophia confirmed. It becomes automatic after a while. The cafe itself presented another lesson in altered social dynamics. The barista who normally greeted Jackson with a businesslike nod now offered Jacqueline a warm smile and complimentary biscotti. A man reading alone at a corner table found repeated reasons to glance their way. Most unsettling was Jackson's own response to these interactions. Part of him, a new, unfamiliar part, found satisfaction in the attention, even as his familiar self felt uncomfortable. His body seemed to have its own reactions, independent of his conscious mind, a flush of warmth at a compliment, a flutter of awareness at certain glances. It's like biological responses I can't control, he confessed to Sophia as they walked through Central Park later. As if this body has its own programming that runs parallel to my thoughts. That's not far from the truth, Sophia replied. Hormones influence everything from emotional responses to spatial perception. You're experiencing a completely different biochemical reality. On Monday, the second week of his transformation began with an unexpected complication. Dr. Webb waiting outside the conservation room with coffee. I thought you might appreciate a proper cup, he offered, holding out a steaming latte. Museum coffee is notoriously terrible. Jackson hesitated, caught between professional courtesy and personal discomfort. That's very thoughtful. Webb stepped closer, his cologne enveloping Jackson in a scent that triggered an unexpected physical response, a flutter in his stomach, a heightened awareness of proximity. I was hoping we might discuss those cross-cultural influences over dinner, Webb continued smoothly. I know a quiet place near the park. Excellent wine list. Before Jackson could formulate a response, another voice interrupted. Dr. Reid is occupied this evening, I'm afraid. Jackson turned to see Professor James Harrington, a distinguished visiting scholar from Oxford who occasionally consulted on authentication. Jackson had worked with him several times in his male form, their relationship strictly professional and occasionally competitive. The Harrington now addressing them regarded Webb with cool assessment, then turned to Jacqueline with a warmth Jackson had never witnessed from him before. We have that authentication meeting for the Sumerian seals, remember? Harrington continued, his British accent somehow more pronounced. Unless you'd prefer to reschedule. Jackson seized the escape opportunity with relief. No, of course, the seals take priority, perhaps another time, Dr. Webb. Webb's expression tightened almost imperceptibly before he nodded. Certainly, enjoy your coffee, Dr. Reid. As Webb walked away, Jackson turned to Harrington with genuine curiosity. There's no authentication meeting for Sumerian seals. Harrington's smile was apologetic but not particularly repentant. No, but you looked like you needed an extraction. Webb's enthusiasm for cultural exchange with female colleagues is well documented. So I'm discovering, Jackson replied dryly. Thank you for the intervention, though it wasn't strictly necessary. Of course. Harrington studied him with unexpected intensity. You know, you remind me remarkably of your cousin. Something in the way you analyze artifacts, the same methodical approach, the same insights. It's almost uncanny. Jackson felt a flutter of alarm. Had Harrington somehow recognized him? We had similar training, he hedged. Clearly, Harrington continued to observe him with academic precision. Would you actually be interested in looking at some Sumerian artifacts? I have several pieces with unusual inscriptions that might relate to your Vandermeer collection. The invitation was professionally relevant, and Jackson had to admit intriguing. That would be helpful, actually. Excellent, my temporary office is on the 4th floor. Shall we say 5 o'clock, after the main conservation work is done? Jackson agreed, ignoring the knowing look Sophia shot him across the room. The meeting with Harrington proved surprisingly productive. The scholar had indeed assembled several artifacts with inscription patterns similar to those on the Vandermeer pieces, including, most importantly, fragments that matched the transformation statuette. These references to embodied knowledge appear in several late Akkadian ritual texts, Harrington explained, pointing to magnified photographs. Always associated with Inanna's temples and always involving some form of transformation as divine instruction. Jackson leaned closer, momentarily forgetting his transformed state in his scholarly excitement. These could be critical to understanding the ritual context. My thoughts exactly, Harrington agreed, his proximity suddenly registering in Jackson's awareness. The scholar's subtle cologne, the warmth radiating from his body, the timbre of his voice, all created sensations Jackson had never experienced in his male form. Harrington seemed similarly affected, his usual academic detachment softening as he regarded Jacqueline. You have a remarkable mind, Dr. Reid. Your cousin mentioned you were brilliant, but that's an understatement. My cousin discussed me, Jackson asked, momentarily confused. In his correspondence, we've exchanged several emails about Akkadian artifacts over the years. He mentioned a brilliant cousin specializing in ritual objects. Harrington smiled, though he failed to mention how captivating you are in person. The compliment caught Jackson completely off guard. In his male form, interactions with Harrington had been strictly professional, occasionally veering into academic rivalry. This warm, attentive Harrington was entirely unfamiliar and disconcertingly appealing. Thank you, Jackson managed, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. Another of those automatic bodily responses he couldn't control. The artifacts are captivating. I should probably get back to my research. Harrington nodded, but his eyes conveyed something more complex than professional courtesy. Perhaps we could continue this discussion over dinner tomorrow. I found several other textual references that might help contextualize your statuette. Jackson hesitated, conflicted. The research was genuinely valuable, and something in Harrington's presence triggered responses in his female body that were both uncomfortable and intriguing, a data point in this bizarre experiment he was living. That would be helpful, he found himself agreeing, for the research. Of course, Harrington replied, a hint of knowing amusement in his eyes. Purely academic. Back at Sophia's apartment, Jackson paced the living room, processing the interaction. It was bizarre. I've known Harrington for years, but he's never looked at me like that. Like what? Sophia asked, not bothering to hide her amusement. Like I was something more interesting than the artifacts. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, a habit that felt different with the long strands flowing through his fingers. And the strangest part is how my body responded. Heart racing, skin flushing, this awareness of his presence. It was like my biology was operating independently from my mind. Welcome to the fascinating world of physical attraction, Sophia said, where your body sometimes makes decisions before your brain gets a vote. But I'm not attracted to men, Jackson protested. Your male self wasn't, Sophia corrected. But this body, this complete female form with all its hormones and neural pathways, clearly responds differently. It's actually fascinating from a scientific perspective. Easy for you to say, you're not the experiment. The dinner with Harrington the following evening proved both professionally valuable and personally unsettling. The scholar had indeed found additional references to transformation rituals, including one that specifically mentioned the moon's cycle of wisdom. It seems these transformations were considered sacred learning experiences, Harrington explained over excellently prepared salmon. The texts suggest they were usually voluntary, initiates seeking divine understanding through embodied knowledge. Voluntary being the key word, Jackson muttered. I beg your pardon. Nothing, please continue. Harrington regarded him thoughtfully. The fascinating aspect is how the transformations were said to reveal hidden truths, perspectives that couldn't be understood intellectually, only experienced directly. Jackson shifted uncomfortably, all too aware of how true that was proving. No amount of academic study could have prepared him for the reality of inhabiting a female body. The sensations, the social dynamics, the completely altered way the world responded to his presence. The priestesses believed that to truly know the divine feminine, one had to embody it, Harrington continued. Not unlike the concept of walking in another's shoes, but taken to a rather extreme level. And these transformations always reversed after a lunar cycle? Jackson asked, trying to focus on the research rather than the way Harrington's voice seemed to resonate through his body. According to the texts, yes, provided the divine lesson was properly received. What does that mean? Jackson asked sharply. What if the lesson wasn't learned? Harrington raised an eyebrow at his reaction. The texts are unclear on that point. They simply state that the transformation ends when understanding blossoms. That's frustratingly vague, Jackson muttered. Ancient religious texts often are, Harrington agreed with a smile that created an unexpected flutter in Jackson's stomach. Though I must say, your passion for this particular subject is remarkable, even for an Akkadian specialist. Jackson realized he'd revealed too much personal interest. Academic curiosity, he deflected. These transformation concepts appear across multiple cultures. It's an underexplored area of comparative mythology. Indeed, Harrington studied him with that penetrating scholarly gaze that now carried an additional layer of interest. You know, you're nothing like what I expected when your cousin mentioned you. Oh, Jackson took a sip of wine to hide his discomfort. How so? Jackson described you as brilliant but rather coldly academic. You're certainly brilliant, but there's nothing cold about you, Dr. Reid. The wine suddenly felt warmer in Jackson's throat, spreading heat through his chest. This body's reactions continued to surprise and confuse him, the way a simple compliment could trigger such physical response. You seem to know my cousin well, he said carefully. We've had a cordial professional relationship for years, though I must admit, I find his cousin far more engaging company. Harrington's eyes held his, the scholar's usual reserve replaced with something warmer, more direct. For a disorienting moment, Jackson felt himself responding to that gaze, not just physically, but emotionally, a flutter of interest he'd never experienced from his male perspective. The sensation was startling enough that he nearly knocked over his water glass. Are you all right? Harrington asked, reaching out to steady the glass, his fingers briefly brushing Jackson's. The contact sent an electric current up Jackson's arm, another of those intense sensations his female body seemed programmed to experience. Fine, he managed. Just a bit tired from the cataloging marathon. Of course, shall I get the check? Outside the restaurant, the cool evening air provided welcome clarity. Jackson took a deep breath, trying to center himself. May I walk you home? Harrington offered. The city can be unpredictable at night. Another revelation of his female existence, the constant calculations about safety, the awareness of vulnerability that had never factored into his male experience. That's very kind, but I'm meeting Sophia. She's just around the corner. Harrington nodded, not pushing the issue. I've enjoyed our discussion, Jacqueline. Perhaps we could continue our research collaboration while I'm in New York. I'd like that, Jackson replied, surprised to find he meant it. Despite the confusion of his physical responses, Harrington's scholarly insights were genuinely valuable. For the research. Of course, Harrington agreed with that same knowing smile. For the research. As they said goodnight, Harrington took Jacqueline's hand in a gesture that fell somewhere between professional and personal. The touch lingered just long enough to send another cascade of warmth through Jackson's body. Until tomorrow, then, Harrington said softly. Walking away, Jackson could feel the scholar's eyes following him. Another new experience, this awareness of being watched, observed, appreciated in a way he'd never understood from the other side. Sophia was indeed waiting around the corner, her expression expectant. Well, how was your date? It wasn't a date, Jackson insisted. It was a research meeting that happened to include food. And the fact that Harrington hasn't taken his eyes off you since you started at the museum is purely academic interest. He's been helpful with contextualizing the statuette, Jackson said defensively. And yes, there's this strange dynamic now, but it's just part of this whole transformation experience. My body reacting in ways I don't control. If you say so, Sophia replied, clearly unconvinced. Did you at least learn anything useful about reversing your condition? Jackson sighed. Only that the transformation ends when understanding blossoms, whatever that means. These ancient priestesses could have benefited from some plain language writing courses. So the real question is, what are you supposed to understand? Sophia mused as they walked toward her apartment. What lesson is this transformation meant to teach you? That's what I can't figure out, Jackson admitted. Is it just about experiencing life from a female perspective? That seems both obvious and unnecessarily elaborate. Maybe it's something specific to you, Sophia suggested. The inscription mentioned the unworthy man understanding what he has failed to value. What have you failed to value, Jackson? The question lingered uncomfortably as they reached Sophia's building. What had he failed to value? His life before had been dedicated to artifacts, to academic pursuit, to preserving the past. He'd valued knowledge, precision, historical accuracy. He'd never valued connection, with colleagues, with friends, with potential partners. The physical world of sensation and emotion had always seemed secondary to the intellectual realm he preferred. Now, trapped in this hypersensitive body, he was forced to exist primarily in that physical realm, aware of every sensation, every emotional response, every subtle social current. "I think I need some air," Jackson said suddenly. "I'm going to walk for a bit." "Want company?" Sophia offered. "No, I just need to think." The city at night was yet another lesson in his transformed reality. Jackson walked cautiously, aware of how different night navigation felt in this female body. Streets he'd strolled down countless times now required strategic assessment. Dark corners, groups of men, even passing cars took on potential significance they'd never held before. Yet amid the caution was a strange new appreciation for the sensory world. The cool breeze against his skin, the scent of flowers from a street vendor's stand, the distant strains of music from a restaurant patio. His female body seemed to absorb these sensations more fully, more completely than his male form ever had. Stopping at a small park, Jackson sat on a bench, watching late-night dog walkers and couples strolling under the lamplights. He'd walked this same park hundreds of times in his male form and never truly noticed the textures of it, the play of light and shadow, the subtle emotional undertones of different groupings of people. "Is that what this is about?" he whispered to himself, learning to actually experience the world instead of just studying it. As if in answer, he felt a strange warmth from his pocket, the statuette, which he'd taken to carrying with him as he researched. Jackson pulled it out carefully, surprised to find it glowing faintly in the darkness. The inscription seemed to pulse with inner light. To know the divine feminine, one must become the vessel. "What am I missing?" Jackson asked the ancient artifact. "What understanding am I supposed to blossom into?" The statuette offered no answer beyond its gentle glow. After a moment, it faded back to dormancy, leaving Jackson alone with his thoughts and a body that continued to experience the world in ways he was only beginning to comprehend.